is hey. We pick up in the middle of Dalet Amud Bet, the two dots, about 10 lines down. So we have to cover some distance today to catch up, but hopefully it'll go relatively quickly. So the Mishnah is working through the variations of how you get it to be on the 12th, 13th, and 14th. So if Purim falls out on a Monday, so the villages and the cities read on Monday because it's a Monday. It's only an issue when it's a non-Monday or a non-Thursday. Okay, so the Gemara says, who's making that noise? Oh, okay, good. So the Gemara says, got it. Why does the beginning of the Mishnah say 12, 13, 14, and talking about the day of the month, and then when it starts giving the examples, it talks about the day of the week that it falls out. Does it fall out on a Monday? Does it fall out on a Tuesday? Does it fall out on a Wednesday? Right? Why not say, in this case, it'll be 12 in this case, 13 in this case, right? Follow the same order of the months rather than switching to the week to the day of the week. So the Gemara says no. If you would go by the day of the month, you would have to work reverse in the week. If you said, well, it's going to be on the 12th when Purim falls out on a Sunday, and it's going to be on the 13th when Purim falls out on a on a Shabbos or on a I haven't figured out on a Friday. So you would have to work back. So the order would be a non-logical order because it'd be working backwards in the days of the week. It's a lot easier to talk about which day of the week it is and then to do the math that way rather than to reverse the math. Okay. Now, if it falls out on a Friday, so it says that the big cities are on the 15th. The big cities and the walled cities are on the 15th because you're not going to read on Shabbos, and the villages are on the 14th. So the Gemara says like this: Masnisin Mani, who's our Mishnah? Rabbi, Rabbi Yossi. It could be Rabbi, it could be Rabbi Yossi, because we're going to see there's a debate of Tanaim, and Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi's position would be consistent with the Mishnah. It's
just the Mukavot Koma, which are the next day.
That's what I said. Oh. Okay, it could be if it's on Friday. So on Friday you read the big cities and the walled cities, and the villages read on Thursday. So that position is either Rabbi or Rabbi Yossi, but it's going to be debated in a Breita, and it's not all the Tanaim. So the Gemara says, my Rebbe, which Rebbe are you referring to? Titania. This is a way of introducing Braitot that show that the point of the Mishnah is actually debated. Okay, so Titania, we talk about Breita. Chalios Be'er Shabbos. The 14th falls out on Friday. So according to this Breita, it says that the cities and the villages both read on a Thursday. And the walled cities read on the Friday. So pretty much nobody reads on the right time. Okay? The walled cities read on the Friday, which is the 14th, and the big cities read on Thursday, which is the 13th. The logic for that, as Gemara will explain, is you cannot have that this position holds the more important thing is that the cities and the read on a different day than everybody else. Read on a different day than the larger cities. Okay, because the Gemara says the Torah says Alkein HaPrazim or Yoshvim Barei HaPrazot, and it's contrasting open cities with walled cities. Those always have to be different. So since you can't read the walled cities on Shabbos, you're going to have to read them on Friday. If you're reading them on Friday, you can no longer have in the big cities to continue to be on Friday. So then you're going to have to push back to Thursday. Okay, so that starts with that principle that you have to keep 14 and 15 distinct. So that's the Tanakama. And then Rebbe says the position of our Mishnah. Rebbe says, Omer Ani, I disagree. I say, Lo yidachu rayos mimkoman. The big cities stay where they are. They're on Friday, on the 14th. So you have the walled cities and the big cities on the same day. They'll both be on a Friday. Okay. So now the Gemara, so that's the debate. Okay, so now the Gemara spells out the different reasons. My time is the Tanakama. What's the motivating issue for the Tanakama? That should be this way every year, right? And they're two separate days. The same way the general rule is that the city, the unwalled cities precede the walled cities. Here too, the unwalled have to precede the walled. So if the walled are going to have to be on Friday, the 14th, so the unwalled will have to be the day before. So the Gemara says, but there's another issue at stake here. It should be like it is every year. The same way in a normal year, you do not move the date of the unwalled cities unless there's like a really compelling reason, like it's on Shabbat. But the general rule is you don't move the date of the unwalled cities. Those are the 14th. So here too, maybe we should say keep it on the 14th and let the kips fall where they may. So it'll be the same date as the walled city. So the Gemara says no. Okay, that's true. There are a lot of things we do every year. The question is, which one has to give? So here, it's not possible to keep the 14th on the right day because the more important principle is 15th and 14th have to be different days. Okay, so for the Tanakama, that is the more important principle, keeping 14 and 15 distinct. The Rabbi, and Rabbi obviously has a different principle that's more important. My time, what's his reason? The same way we like to keep the unwalled cities in their regular place on the 14th. It's not that we never change it, but that's what we want to prioritize. Here too, you keep them on the 14th, and if that results in the walled and the unwalled reading on the same day, both reading on Friday the 14th, so let it be. The Gemara says, how about the other principle? How about the general idea that the unwalled precede the walled cities? Okay, but you can't do that here because you got to choose between your principles. Is it basically going to be let's keep the 14th, let's keep the unwalled before the walled, that's the Tanakama, or let's not move the 14th unless absolutely necessary, and that's Rebbe, and that's the position of our Mishnah.
That's what Efshar means. Does Efshar mean if we go into Shabbos and it's not a walled city and that's something to do with that?
No, that's why you have to move the 15th. But it's not low Efshar to move the 14th. You can just move the 14th back to the 13th, which is what the Tanakama does. Okay, so the Gemara says, so that's anyway the opinion of our Mishnah, but the Gemara is pointing out that according to the Tanakama of this Breita, there's another possibility. Have the, move the 14th, move the 15th and the 14th to keep those on separate days. My Reb Yossi. Where's the Reb Yossi that also holds like Rabbi, but introducing Reb Yossi will also introduce a third possibility of what to do in this Friday scenario. Titania, we turn a Breita. Chalios Berev Shabbos, it falls out on a Friday. So walled cities and the villages go back to a Thursday. So listen to this possibility. We're going to keep the 14th on the day. We won't move that unless it's absolutely necessary. So the unwalled cities stay in the 14th. But I also agree that walled cities and unwalled shouldn't be on the same day. So what am I going to do? I'm going to have them go all the way back to Thursday. The walled cities and the villages will be on Thursday. So at least it'll keep the walled and the unwalled distinct. All right?
They read before the unwalled.
Before the unwalled, right? Wow. So, Varayas Kidolos Kohen Bo Biyo. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Ein Mukafim Kodmin La Rayos. No, come on. You cannot have the walled cities come before the unwalled, especially if you think about the irony, right? Because the whole point is that the walled cities, the nace continued further. So to say the walled cities have a celebration on the 14th, okay, the primary victory occurred on the 14th, even in Shushan. So it makes sense to have, it occurred on the 13th, they celebrate on the 14th, So it makes sense the 14th is relevant for Shushan, right? So, but to go all the way earlier, that seems to make
This is just
sense.
reading it as opposed to also the other things we do, like the mitzvah of the day.
So that's a good point. We're going to get to the issue of the other mitzvahs of the day, and you're right that, this is specifically about the reading of it, so you don't have to necessarily make bigger argument that the whole Yom is not relevant. It's a good point, but still, you would want the reading to correspond to some significance.
You have the formalism is undermining the content.
Exactly, that's a good point. So the Rabbi Yossi like our Mishnah, 14th and 15th read on Friday, and the villages read on Thursday. Okay, so the Gemara just spells out what clearly are the principles here. My time at the Tanakama, Dichsiv, b'chol shana b'shana, like every year, ma'kol shana b'shana ayars be'arba'asar, v'zmano shozeh, lo zmano shozeh. The same way in general, we try to keep the big cities on the 14th fixed, and we try to keep the walled and the unwalled on different days, not necessarily one preceding the other, but at least different days. So here too, so even if it means having the 15th go earlier and go on a Thursday. Why don't we say, look, but the general rule is that in every year, even maybe we don't have to say the walled cities always comes after the unwalled, but at least they never come before the unwalled. Here too, let's say they don't come before. No, Shani Yachad Lo Efshar. Look, we don't have all of our choices available here. Something's got to give. So I'd rather make them earlier in order to keep them distinct. My time to Rabbi Yossi. What's the reason of Rabbi Yossi? Like we said before, no, for me, I'm not going to let the walled, they might be on the same day as the unwalled, but they're not going to be before the unwalled. How about the idea of keeping them as distinct days? Here too, let's keep them as distinct days. But says no, here there's no option. Okay, meaning no option, but you got to choose between bad options.
No option
that he likes. Exactly. Okay, now I do think that the interesting thing that emerges from this, and I'm not going to sort of give an answer right now, but I want you to think about, I mean, not like I have an answer, but I want you to sort of think about and grapple with, is, one of the big like chidushim of the Megilah and of the Masechet, because this Masechet institutionalizes it. Like the Megilah just mentions, what happened in Shushan. That Shushan had an extra day, and it says the Prazim keep the 14th, and it never says what the non-Prazim keep. Right, so it's not even so explicit, although it does say 14th and 15th. Okay, maybe everybody would have had a Shushan, but who knows? Anyway, but what our Mishnah and what Chazal do is they institutionalize the idea of different days of Purim. And we don't have that by any other Chag, right? I mean, we have 2 days of Yontiv and Chutzos, but fundamentally different days of a Chag. The whole idea, as I've said before, is that, one of the things that unifies the people is that they all keep the same type of like liturgical calendar, right? Difference between like Eastern Orthodox, and Western Christianity, is different calendars of the holidays and so on, how you keep your calendar. So the idea that you're dividing the people into 2 separate days, it seems like, it's like, A, you have to explain why did we allow that to happen? Isn't that a bad thing? But then it almost is like we are reinforcing it, right? We're making even multiple different days, 13th, 11th, 12th, etc. So now you could actually say maybe that doesn't reinforce it. Maybe it actually helps. Like if there's a lot of options, it's not like we're 2 separate people, the walled cities and the unwalled cities. It's like there are a lot of possible days that we could read. But it's interesting to thinking how we increase the options. And here too, the positions that say, I'm going to insist that you keep 14th and 15th distinct, whether it's by making, however it's going to be done. But there are 2 opinions here that are insisting, whether it's by making one earlier, whether it's pushing both days, we have to keep them distinct. We don't like the idea that they should be together. I think it raises a very fascinating question. Like, shouldn't that be certainly not a bad thing, that it's possible that we all are going to celebrate on the same day. So I do want to have that. We don't paskin that way in this case, right? In this case, we paskin that they will read on the same day. That's our Mishnah. That's Rabbi, okay, that they both read on Thursday. But I do think it's something to certainly think about. Yes, Sally.
I think before you get into all the details of it, it's just the basic system of rabbinic law calendarizing events.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way that, if let's say Ha'egel and Raglim have to be assigned dates on the calendar.
Uh-huh.
So all the things that happen in Megilah have to have a date on, and the more dates on the calendar, the better.
We like to have a calendar filled with dates. That's an interesting point. Like the whole fact that we have all these summer months. Well, we have the 3 weeks, and that then leads us up to Elul, and that then we make a point of the fact that Mar Cheshvan doesn't have any dates in it. So okay, that's an interesting point. But I still think the question about why would you want to insist that you keep the 14th and 15th separate, right? So you're saying because you want to have multiple dates. But here you're going to have multiple dates anyway. You're going to have a Thursday and a Friday. The question is just how do you distribute which does the Thursday and which does the Friday? So I still do think it's a relevant question. Charlie, what do you want to say?
Yeah, there's one other case where things are read on different days. When first day of Shavuot falls on Friday, there are several weeks where the Torah readings differ between Israel and the diaspora.
Yeah, but that's not that's true. But again, that's not so much like a chag,
Right.
and but there are those differences. That is true. Okay, so let's continue. Anyway, so to me, definitely something that's very distinct about Megilah is the separation of the celebrations. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. Where are we? So the Gemara says like this: Sava Rebbe Arayos Lo Tachina Liyam HaKnisa. Does Rebbe really hold that we're going to insist again, unless it falls out on Shabbos, but we're going to insist that the unwalled cities are on the 14th and they don't get pushed back to a Monday, Thursday? The Hatanya, but we taught in a Brisa, Chalios b'Shabbos, when it comes out on Shabbos, Kfar Makdimin Liyam HaKnisa. So the villages go back to the Thursday. Varais Gedolos Karim Be'erev Shabbos, and the big cities read on Friday. And of course the walled cities are Sunday because that's their natural day. Okay, Rebbe Omer, so that's okay, you can't do it on Shabbos, you got to do it on Friday. All's well and good. But Rebbe says, Omer Ani, Hov, Koman, since you're already moving the old cities from their fixed day, you're pushing them back from Shabbos to Friday. You might as well push them all the way back to Thursday, make life more convenient on people, and have everybody in the unwalled read on the same day. Everybody read on Thursday. So you see, he's willing to move it back to a Thursday. So why wouldn't he, when it fell out on a Friday, why was he unwilling to move it back to a Thursday? So the answer is obvious. How can you compare those cases? Hasam's manam Shabbos. There, the 14th fell out on a Shabbos. Like Rebbe says, if you're already moving the day, so we'll move it to Thursday. That's more convenient. The halcha, in the case we were talking about, it's manam erev Shabbos. It was a Friday. So, and when you're able to keep it on its regular day, he's not going to move it to Thursday just to make it easier. Okay. Kaman azla hadam Rabbi Chelba. Who is it going like that? Which Rabbi Chelba taught. Amar Rav Huna, in the name of Rav Huna. Purim shechalios b'Shabbos hakol nidachim liyom haknisa. So when Purim falls out on Shabbos, everybody is going to be on Thursday. So really, everybody? What about the walled cities? They're going to do on Sunday. Why should they move? Anybody that we're going to be moving, we're going to move back to Thursday. So come on, Rebbe. That's like Rebbe. If you're already moving the 14th from Shabbos, you might as well push it back to Thursday. And I would point out that again, like Rabbi in the Mishnah, that has the benefit of minimizing the distribution of days, right? Might as well, if we're able to collapse, the Kfarim and the Ayaros, we might as well. So it seems like Rabbi does not find it problematic to to overlap days, and sometimes maybe even prefers that. Okay. So the Gemara says like this: everybody, nonetheless, clearly the assumption of our entire Mishnah on all these brightos is Megilah b'Shabbos lo karina. We can't read the Megillah on Shabbos. My time never is explained why not. So Amar Rabba, famous statement of Rabba, everybody's obligated to read the Megillah, and the Eina called the Tkiyas Shofar is clearly a later insertion. The Eina called became b'Mikra Megillah, but not everybody knows how to read it. So here you are at home. You own a Megillah, presumably, but you don't know how to read it for yourself. So you'll take it in your hand, you'll go over to your next door neighbor, he knows how to read, or he'll teach me how to read. You come to carry it, okay, which is a little funny because if you have somebody else in the town who knows how to read, presumably they own a Megillah, but not necessarily. Maybe he's not wealthy enough to own a Megillah. He knows how to read. A lot of people, I think, know how to read, but don't necessarily own a Megillah. So you'll wind up carrying your Megillah to that person. The Hainu, now that's what all Rabbah says. Then it's important to recognize that the next line is introduced by the stam of the Gemara, because you see the shift Aramaic. The Hainu time of the shofar, the Hainu time of the lulav. Oh, the same reason is for shofar and lulav, because shofar and lulav we know are two other things that you will not do on Shabbos. Okay, now the thing to notice is that and when we learned Masechet Sukkah, we discussed this, and Masechet Rosh Hashanah, it's possible maybe shofar and lulav. There's other reasons why you don't do it on Shabbos. Shofar, the Gemara quotes a pasuk about Zichron Trua, Yom Trua, the idea that even if it's not a malacha, still the sound is some sense of a violation of Shabbos, that type of a thing. Who knows what the other reasons are, but all of this comes from, Rabbah made one claim about the reason by Megillah, and then the Gemara expands that to all these other three cases. All we know from the Tanaitic material is you don't do these things on Shabbos. Okay, and our assumption that, the reason you don't do it is because you're afraid you'll come to carry is all based on a statement Rabbah makes by Megillah that gets expanded by the stam of the Gemara to the other cases. The Yerushalmi does not necessarily, certainly by shofar, and does not necessarily buy in that that's the only reason, or that is the reason why these things are not done on Shabbos. Just 1 minute, and I want to even show you that the next line of the Gemara suggests at least another reason for Megillah. So the Gemara says, Rav Yosef Amar, Because you read the Megillah, it says Matanos of Yonim, and you have all the poor in the show, and this is like the greatest they want to put their hands out, but it's Shabbos. I'm sorry, I can't give. Somebody once commented to me, like he says the difference in terms of like in synagogues as opposed to in churches. It says never underestimate the power of being able to pass around the collection plate after the sermon. Right? In a synagogue, you cannot pass around the collection plate after the sermon. It's Shabbos. So you can talk about the importance of tzedakah or whatever you're talking about, but then you can't go ahead and have people immediately act on it. So here you're reading the Megillah. What a great opportunity, for the aniyim to say, okay, matanos avyonim, no. And if you don't do it on that day, they're going to wind up getting a lot less. And they're certainly going to feel despair at the time of the reading of the Megillah. So a very different reason, nothing to do with carrying. So what does he think the reason is for shofar and lulav? Who knows? We'll figure out what that reason is, but nothing to do with carrying. Now, Tosfos is not happy with the idea that there could be this reason that's not based on carrying. If you look at Tosfos, Rav Yosef Megillah, Tosfos says, Rav Yosef lo plug pligi atayma derabba. He doesn't really argue on the reason of carrying. There's no other reason for shofar and lulav. There's another reason here as well, etc. Okay, but that's not necessarily pshat. The Gemara is the one that extended Rabbah to shofar lulav. Rav Yosef has a different reason of Megillah. Maybe has a different reason. Maybe there's a different reason for shofar and lulav as well. Yes, David, you had a question.
Would you use carrying a plate
in a walled city? Oh, that's an excellent point. Yes, the walled city, there's no problem with carrying. So why? Because that's an excellent point. So according to Rabbi, what's the whole issue of a walled city not doing it on Shabbos? Yeah. Especially because we're going to see later that it has to have really walls on all four sides. Now, it is possible that you have a walled city and you didn't make an Erev Chatzeres, but then we're dealing with a Drabanan problem. Or you could have a walled city that has so much, the Gemara says, like if the doors of Yerushalayim weren't locked at night, then that would create a Rishus Harabim Yerushalayim, but still the likelihood is much, much rarer. It's an excellent point. Because you can't say like low plug. The whole category is walled cities. I don't know. People must talk about it. I have to look that up. That's a great question. Okay, so that at least, and clearly you move the walled cities from the 14th as well. So Tosfos might answer, well, that's right. Rav Yosef gives an additional reason. He reads it as additional, not alternative. Okay, Tanya Namihachi, we taught similarly. Avo Pisha Amu Kvar Makdimim Yom HaKnisa. And this is going to support Rav Yosef's idea about the importance of having Matanos of Yonim the same day of the reading of the Megillah. Even though they said that the villages do it on a Monday and a Thursday, the general early reading, Govim Bo B'Yom Umechalkim Bo B'Yom. That the other thing we push up, Michael's asking, it's just the Mikra Megillah we push up. How about the Seudah, right? How about, the other mitzvahs, Mishloach Manot? So here we're seeing that the Matanos Levyonim is coupled with the Mikra Megillah, exactly for this reason. You're reading in the Megillah, Matanos Evyonim, you have to act on it. You do not want to create despair amongst the Aniyim that they're hoping for, not getting it. The other point I made also, people hopefully will give more if they're doing it immediately in response. So when you read the Megillah early, you also do the Matanos Evyonim early. Not only do you collect it early, right? If the whole question is how much will people give, maybe you collect it early, but we'll distribute it on Purim. No, that's the point that the Aniyim are now waiting for it. So not only do you collect it on that date, you distribute it on that date as well. So we'll get to that. With that, we're not, So hold off on that, right? The remaining questions are Mishloach Manot and the Seudah. Okay. Where are we? Tanya Mihachi, we taught similarly. I'm sorry. I read that. Okay. Alpha Pisha Amru. Even though they said you do it early, that you collect on that. You collect early as well. Mishum da Amru. It's because you're reading early, therefore you collect early. It's not actually although. Ella, okay, fine. That's what it means. Because they said you're going to read early on a Monday, Thursday, you also collect that day and distribute that day. Because the Aniyim are looking, to the reading of the Megillah. Everybody's going to be around. They're going to be gathered. They're going to say, finally, here's a great opportunity. People will actually give us some tzedakah. Okay. Aval, going back to Michael's point, Simcha eina noheges ela bizmana. The rejoicing, meaning the Seudas Purim, that is only in the right time. That only is on the actual
So you
date,
don't
the
have to wait
14th or the
then.
15th. So if they want to use their money for the Suda, whatever. Anyway, the Suda is only on the date, the real date, not on the early date. This is also apply if you read early because of Shabbos. So the remaining mitzvah we didn't cover, Megillah will be early. Matanos Evyanim goes with Megillah. Suda goes bizmano. So what's the one thing we haven't dealt with? Mishloach manot. So Mishloach manot is basically understood to be you're sending manot, you're sending food because that's going to be eaten at the Su'udah. That's a way of sharing the Su'udah. So if Matanos Evyanim goes with Megillah, Mishloach manot goes with the Su'udah. Both of those are bo bayom. Okay?
What's interesting is that then you sort of have the tension of Shabbat and Purim because you want to have a nice Suda for Shabbos. So if you're doing it earlier, you may not have as much for Shabbos because these poor people and. You know what I'm saying? Depending on when you do it. In other words, if we're saying that we're makdimim everything, we want to because
not makdimim the Suda. What do you mean?
No, what? I'm sorry.
You're not makdimim the Suda. The Suda is on the day that it falls. You're makdimim Mikra Megillah with Matanos Evyonim, and the Suda Mishloach Manot you keep on the day. Okay, it doesn't say Mishloach Manot, but that's the assumption. All right. Yes.
Mishloach Manot requires you to take things from one place to another.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's a very good point. Well, this case of makdim,
in other words, the way they live.
Right, but his point is it does become quite ironic. His point about the Mikra Megillah and the Krachim, and here the Mishloach Manot. So this case is all right. I got to look into both of those. Excellent points. All right. The Gemara says like this: Amar Rav, Megillah bizmana karnos or afilu biyachid, shelo bizmana ba'asara. So now we get to this Pirsume Nisa issue, which was so important. We saw before about how weighty it is and the inclusion of women and all these other issues. So here, then the question should come up, if Pirsume Nisa is such a central part of Mikra Megillah, maybe you should need to do it B'tzibur. Right? And now, we light Hanukkah candles and we say it's about Pirsume Nisa. We don't say it's B'tzibur, but at least we say it has to be in a place where it's visible and it has to be at a time when people are walking around the streets. So maybe there has to be that element by Mikra Megillah as well. So here the Gemara introduces that possibility. Amar Rav, Megillah bizmana konos afil biyachid. If you're reading it on the right time, it's not an early date, then even an individual can read it. You can read it even without the aspect of Pirsume Nisa. Well, let's take a look. You can read it even as a private individual. Shalo bizmana, not in its right time, when you're doing it like early Monday, Thursday, or whatever it is. Ba'asara, you need 10 people. You need it to be Pirsume Nisa birabim. By the way, 10 people, does that necessarily mean 10 men and a minyan idea? Or is the idea of Rabim not the same as Minyan? It's not necessarily Dvarim Shebikdusha, right? The issues come up, for example, when we say, maybe it's not so radically different because events of the time of Megilah. But anyway, if we say the idea, actually Hanukkah rather, but anyway, you say the idea that there's an idea of about Kiddush Hashem, right? That if it's like Barabim, martyring, somebody has to martyr themselves Barabim if there's a certain case, in certain cases. So the psak of the Marame Rittenberg is that's not defined by 10 men. Right? The idea of Rabbim is not an idea of Dvarim Shebikdusha, it's an idea of like many people. So anyway, there's an interesting question about the idea of Rabbim by Megilah as well, when there's this idea, does it mean the sense of Minyan, or how do you define the 10? So that's number one, that point of Ba'asara. But going back then to this, so that it's about because Asara, as I'm saying, could play a role of Rabbim and could play a role of like Dvarim Shebikdusha, which is a sort of different type of role. Here, there's this difference. If you're reading it Shelo Bizmana, it has to have that element of Pirsume Nisa. So what's the aspect when it's Bizmana? Does it not need Pirsume Nisa? So you could take it two ways. You could say, you could be Mekayim it with Pirsume Nisa and without Pirsume Nisa. Obviously, it's best to be Mekayim it with Pirsume Nisa, but if you're already doing it at the right time, maybe technically you can do it even without that element. We'll allow a part, like the non-full kiyum. If already we're sort of compromising and having it not the right time, and especially if you realize that the reason we push it early is at a communal level. We don't push it early at an individual level. We do it for like a community, for the whole kfar, for the whole year, right? That's why we're doing it early. early. So then it also has to be, sort of done at that communal level. That's one way of reading it. Rashi tries to say that if you're doing it at the right time, you'll always get Pirsumei Nisa. If you look at Rashi, Bizmana, top of the daf, B'Yudalid, Mitoshu Chova Bo B'Yom, Al Kol Yachid B'Yachid, Kronos Afila B'Yachid, Kol Korin Bo, V'Ika Pirsum Hanes. Since this is the fixed time, everybody's going to read today. So even if everybody's reading individually, maybe everybody's doing like a Pirsum Hanes for themselves. I don't exactly get it because if the whole village is reading early, then all the villagers are. But maybe the difference is the village is reading early, but the town is not. So some of the people of this current population are reading, and some of this population are not reading. That's not the same idea of a Pirsum Hanes if everybody in this population is involved in it, even if they're involved in it at the private level. So you can try to sort of unpack that, but Rashi tries to claim that when it's Bizmana, and presumably Bizmana means everybody, and therefore everybody is doing it, you don't have to worry about whether you're performing it Barabim or Biyachid. When it's Shelo Bizmana, it requires more of the element of Rabbi. So that's the initial position. Rav Asi Omer, Bein Bizmana, Bein Shelo Bizmana, Be'asara. Whether in its right time or not in right time, you always need asara, which means no, you always need this fuller element of Pirsum Hanes, right? By the way, it's somewhat similar to the whole issue of lighting Hanukkah candles inside the house and not in the window. Can you have a Pirsum Hanes for B'nai Bayis, like a personal Pirsum Hanes? And he is saying, no, you always need this Pirsum Hanes going outside, going to other people. It always has to be B'tzibur or B'rabim. Have there was a case.
Like sick or something.
What? All right, let me finish this. There was a case that was read once Shelo Bizmana, and maybe again it was being pushed earlier because of a Shabbos, maybe it was a case of a village, and Rav, although he said that you need, there was a case where it was Bizmana, there was a case where it's Bizmana, and although Rav says Bizmana you could do it Biyachid, Rav made a point of being concerned for the position of Ravasi and trying to insist that he would do it for Rabim. So here, sort of giving, in terms of practice, he's inclined towards being Machmir, at least like Ravasi, always doing it for Rabim. So Miyamar Rav Hari, would Rav really say that to like always push you to do it for Rabim, even if it's the case of Bizmana? V'amar Rav Yehuda Braid Rav Shmuel Bar Shelas Mishmei Rav Purim Shechal Yos B'Shabbos. So we have this teaching in the name of Rav. When Purim falls out on Shabbos, Erev Shabbos is Manam. So the time becomes Friday. So what does it mean? Erev Shabbat Manam. Their time is Friday. Shabbos Manam. No, their date is Shabbos. We might read it early, but the date isn't Friday. Elav Hachikamar. This must be what he means. Shelo Bizmanam Kizmanam. If we're not talking about the villagers reading early, we're talking about shifting the whole date from a Shabbos to a Friday, then Friday has the status of Zmano. So what's the significance of having the status of Zmano? Mazmanam afilu biyachid. The same way when it's normally on the right date, you can do it private. Shelo bizmanam afilu biyachid. Then Shelo bizmano, you could also do it biyachid if the whole date has shifted. Meaning, the idea, where do we see that it matters whether you call something Zmano or not for Mikra Megilah, right? It only matters according to Rav. That says bizmano, you can read it biyachid, and Shelo bizmano, you need to do it for Rabbi. Okay? Otherwise, we haven't seen this concept of Zmano. And now he says within Rav, there's two scenarios of Shelo bizmano. There's the case where the villagers read early. That's a real Shelo bizmano. That's when he says you need to do it for Rabbim. As that Rashi explains, part of the population is reading, part is not. There to get a Pirsumei Nisa, you have to do it for Rabbim. Then there's another case where the entire date, it fell out on Shabbos, and for all the cities, the entire population is reading on Friday. That, he says, then Friday becomes Zmano, and therefore you can read it even Biyachid, because everybody is reading it on that day. It's not like a split population like the villagers. So the Gemara says, look, you see that Rav is not going like Ravasi. Rav is saying by his position that says that there's a difference between Zmano and Shelo Bizmano. So the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. L'inyan Mikra Megilah B'Asara, I could tell you that when it comes to reading of the Megillah, Rav holds like Ravasi, and whether it's Zmano, whether it's not Zmano, you always need to do it with 10. Elamai Erev Shabbos Zmanam. So for what reason would we say Friday is Zman? If the idea of Zmano isn't relevant for the idea of whether you need 10 people or not. So Lafuke mi de Rabbi, to exclude the position of Rabbi, Damar Hovi nidach minkomam yidachul yom haknisa. Rabbi says if you're moving it from Shabbos already, don't put it on Friday, put it all the way back to Thursday. It's not telling you there's a conceptual difference between an idea of zmano and not zmano. It's a way of underscoring, like it's a way of, of pushing back against the position of Rabbi. Rabbi says, you might as well push it, you might as well put it to Thursday. No! Friday is the right time, not Thursday. So it really is not coming to tell you anything of halachic import. It's just coming to underscore that it's rejecting the position of Rebbe. So in the end, we're left with the fact that Rav says that Shelo Bismano, certainly when the case is it's a split population, like the villagers are reading in a different date than the town people, everybody agrees you need to do it Barabbin. Bismano is a debate, but in the end, Rav is inclined to go like Ravasi, and the Gemara wants to interpret Rav consistent with Ravasi, that would say even Bismano you need to do it Barabbin. Now that's not our practice. So Rashi and Tosfos both insist that based on another Gemara, it's clear that you could be Yotzei B'Yachid. But what this is doing, the position of Ravasi is saying that that's really like a b'diavad way of fulfilling it. That's true, you can be Yotzei B'Yachid, but it's not just like, I can daven B'Yachid, I can daven B'Tzibur, it's better to daven B'Tzibur, but it's not like it's a b'diavad davening B'Yachid, although don't tell other people that, okay? But, but that's like, okay, I get a higher kiyum if I do it B'Tzibur. Here, it's different. Fundamentally, you say the mitzvah is about Pirsumei Nisa, and fundamentally it starts B'Rab. But it is true that if you didn't do it Barabbim, you could still be to the point that look at Tosfos. He says, "Have uvda b'chashlei Rav lahad Ravasi." So Tosfos says, "Mikol mokom hilchasa kavasei de Rav." First of all, we rule like Rav, and then he goes, about the first version of Rav that bismano you can do it biyachid, and he says. Now I'm like 2 lines down in the narrow lines, middle of the line. The Rav Asi Tamid Rav. I'm sorry. He says like this: Rabbeinu Yosef, what is this? Ish Yerushalayim. I know what it is. Pasak the Af Biyachid Tzarich Levarich. V'cheinim sa b'tshuvas Rashi. Sheishiv nira be'inai the loshna Yachid v'loshna Tzibur echad mevarich v'cheim shomim and v'chein nira etc. So Tosfos even has a havamina that when you're doing it b'yachid you don't make the brachas. Now, you could say maybe you don't make the bracha of Shas Anisim because you don't have the Pirsum Hanes aspect. Maybe he's not questioning the other brachas. But it seems like Tosfos is questioning maybe all the brachas shouldn't be made when you're doing it b'yachid. Maybe there's a real type of a b'diavad fulfillment and doesn't even deserve the bracha of Al Mikra Megilah. But minimally, it might not deserve the bracha of Shas Anisim because it might be lacking in a significant way the Pirsum Hanes component. So there is a question that do we pass him like Rav or not? But the other point is that nobody would say you're not Yotzei according to Rav Asi, but you might be saying it's a really very b'diavad type of fulfillment. Okay, and that's an important like somebody says I got to rush off to work. We discussed the other day that the reading in the Megilah of the morning halachically is really more weighty than the reading at the night. Okay, I know, but I got to rush off to work, so I'll go to work, and then when I come back, I'll read it to myself, right? So here the point would be, that to appreciate is that how to make that type of a cheshbon if you really say it's a very b'diavad fulfillment, at least according to Rav Asi. Yes.
There's Rabbim, which is, I guess, technically filled if you have 10 people. Well, then what about the idea of going to the bigger minyan in town and stuff like that?
Right. So that's an interesting question, right? So
we certainly don't do that around here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are some opinions about that, but I'm not sure you have to. Like everybody is getting every reading of it is being mefarsem it to a rabbim, and then you have multiple rabbims. It's sort of like everybody's getting the message. So. It's a good question about whether whether there are poskim that insist that you should. I mean, normally that's framed in the context of like the Rovam Hadras Melech, that it's a more, and even in the context of the Rovam Hadras Melech, we don't pay attention to that, and we've had a long history of having multiple different minyanim and choices and so on. But here you want to say, in addition to the normal Birovam, there's maybe a greater sense of Pirsum Hanes when it's a larger community all at once, rather than multiple parallel communities. Okay, so now I have a lot of things I need to look up. Okay. I vaguely remember that there's some discussion about that, but I have to double check it.
Question?
Yes.
Before we go to the next mission. On the first day, we were discussing about days, and the 15th sometimes does fall out on Shabbat in our calendar, and none of us knew what the current practice is in Yerushalayim.
Yeah, it's you separate these things out, and that's reminding me about the Mishloach Manot case about Mishulash, right? Because. Right. I said it incorrectly before, right? Because what you do in Yerushalayim by Purim Mishulash is you read Megilah early and you have Matanos Yomi early. is on Shabbos.
15th on
15th on Shabbos.
So they read
Right, you read Megillah early, right? You have the Seudah on Shabbos, and you do the Mishloach Manos on Sunday. So I actually misspoke and that's because even though it's a walled city, but certainly when you're makdiming because of not the village case. In the village case, right, what I would say would be correct. If the villagers would go back to a Monday, then they would have the Seudah and the Mishloach Manot on the same day. But when you're going back because of Shabbos, then you put the Mishloach Manos the day after. So
even though the Mishloach Mano is
about the Seudah,
it's kind of connected to the
yeah,
Seudah.
I know. But that answers. I'm gonna double check all of this, but that answers David's question, if that's correct, about the issue that Mishloach Manos is about sending things. So what are you doing? So right. So you keep Mishloach Manos with the Seudah when you're going early because of like the villager, and the normal date is a non-Shabbos date. But if the normal date is a Shabbos date, that's what they do now in Yerushalayim, and they have three. They have it. Friday is the Kriya. Shabbos is the Seudah, and Mishloach Manos is Sunday. All right, so now the Gemara says like this. Ezu Ir Gedolah, what is a big city? Kol sheyesh basar batlanim. We saw that before. You need 10 people that are sitting around not doing anything. 10 people that are in the shul ready to make a minyan. Otherwise, it's not a big city. It would be a village, and it would get pushed back to the market day. Pachas mikan harei ze kfar. Less than this is a village. And gets pushed back. So regarding the reading of the Megillah, they say that there are times you'll do it early but you'll never do it late, right? You never do something like, you never do the 14th, later than the 14th, and you never do the 15th later than the 15th. Avuzman atze kohanim, probably some so we just saw this in Tanit. The day that people would have that special holiday of bringing wood to the Beis Hamikdash, the Tisha B'Av, and when the 9th of Av, and as Rashi points out, other fast days as well. Chagiga. If the bringing of a korban chagiga, normally you would bring on the first day of Yontiv, but if the first day of Yontiv falls out on a Shabbos, you can't do it. The Hakel, which you would do at the beginning of a Shemitah cycle on Sukkot, the day after Sukkot, but if the day after, but if that day falls on, actually the first day of Chol HaMoed of Sukkot, not after all Sukkot. So if that day falls out on Shabbos, you can't do it. We'll see why in the Gemara. So if all of these things can't be done on their right day because they fall out on Shabbos, and you don't fast on Shabbos, etc., and you wouldn't bring the wood to the Beis Hamikdash on Shabbos.
It's not Yom Tov Achron Shulchan?
Well, if you look at the side, they switch the gears to Yom Tov Rishon because it actually is okay. But actually, there's some issue about that. All right. So anyway, Anyway, all these cases. So in all of these cases where you have to push it off. So where are we? You push it off to Sunday. You don't push it earlier to Friday, and we'll see why in the Gemara. Now also, although they said you read the Megillah early on a Thursday and a Monday in these villages, and here's the line, Matanos Evyonim is not mutarim, but okay. So meaning that's when you do Matanos Evyonim. So although you read it earlier, right? Although you read it early, that day itself of reading is not the yontiv. So if you're reading on a Monday or a Thursday, and the real 14th falls out, on a Wednesday, and you're reading on a Monday, so that Monday, it's a day of doing the mitzvah Mikra Megillah, but it's not Purim. Purim is still Wednesday, and therefore you can have a hesped and a tainus on that Monday. Okay, it's a day where you can have these. So all right, that's not in the Gemara. Okay, so the Chag of Purim remains on its right day, but the early day of reading is just the mitzvah of reading, and therefore does not make it forbidden to have a hesped and to do a fast. But like we said before, Matanas Evyonim, what you do together with the reading is the gifts to the poor. So with the reading comes the gifts to the poor, but does not come the whole idea of the Chag of Purim. The Chag of Purim remains bizmano in its right date, and that's when the Simcha is. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amasai, when is it true that the villagers read earlier? If these villagers actually come into the town on Monday and Thursday. But if it's a scenario where you have villages, but they don't come into the towns on Mondays and Thursdays, so then we don't allow them to read early. The whole point of reading early is because they're coming into the towns on those days. Okay, so a lot of things here about wrapping up this idea about reading earlier in the villages. So back to the Gemara. To the Gemara. Tana, Asar Batlanim Shebebeis HaKnesset. So Asar Batlanim means 10 people hanging around in shul, to be available for a minyan. So the idea about being a minyan man or whatever already has a very long history.
But Laning, that sounds like a negative.
Yeah, I know. But it means they're like readily available to, they're sitting around. They're cola guys that are there on the show. What? And maybe it means retired. Okay. If Rashi says, if you look at Rashi, they're not doing any work. Raji explains it completely as like you're paid to get off to not work so that you're always available to make a minyan. So there's this joke. I don't know how funny it is. There's this joke that this guy appears before a judge. Whatever he's giving testimony. So they say, state your name and profession. So he says, whatever. He says, Yanko Frank, and I'm a minyan man. So the judge says, what's a minyan man? So he says, well, they give me a salary, and if they have 9 men and they need a 10th, so they call me up. So the judge says, that's crazy. He says, I could do that. So he looks at us and I says, oh, you're a year too, huh? Anyway, da-da-dum. Okay, anyway, so moving on. So the Gemara says like this. The Elu, what? Right. So the Gemara says, okay, the Elu Amru, where are we? Sorry. I'm sorry. Oh, so the Elu Amru Makdimin V'lo Ma'achim. My time, what's the reason? Amar Rabbi Yavar Amar Shmuel Amar Kra V'lo Ya'avor. Okay, so it can't be later. Amar Rabbi Yavar Bar Shmuel Minayin Shein Monim Yomim Mushani. Now, since we had a statement for Rabbi Yavar Bar Shmuel, we say a different statement for Rabbi Yavar Bar Shmuel. How do you know that you don't count days when it comes to years? Years are measured in months, not days. Shenemar l'chadshei hashana. Chadashim atamona l'shanim v'i atamona yamim l'shanim. So years are counted by months, not by days. I'll say what this means in a minute. Rabbanan, the Rabbanan the Kisri, Mishum Rabbi Ava Amru, and the Rabbanan of Caesarea send the name Rabbi Ava. Minayin shein v'chashvin sha'os l'chadashim. How do you know you don't measure months by hours? You mention them by days. Shenemar ad chodesh yamim, until the month of days. Yamim atam mechashev l'chadashim, v'yatam mechashev sha'ot l'chadashim. You count days to months and not hours to months. What does this mean? So Rashi says the case is, for example, somebody takes a vow that they're not going to eat something for a whole year. Okay, now it's the 3rd of Sivan. So how do you measure a year? So you measure a year until the 2nd of Sivan. You measure it by sort of the day of the month, and you do not measure it by days. You don't say, no, a year is 354 days, a lunar year. A solar year is 365 days. So if you say you're not going to eat it for a year, that means 354, 365. No, you don't go by days. You don't go by days, you go by months, which means like the day of the month. Similarly, if you say, I'm not going to eat this thing for a month, you say a month is till the same, the same date or one day before that in the next month. You don't say, no, a month is 29 and a half days. And you measure a month by hours. It's 29 days and 12 hours. So you don't measure these by hours, you measure them by days. Okay. Hold on. I'm sorry. Just give me 1 second. I just need to answer this. I'm sorry for 1 second. Okay. All right. So I'm sorry. Back to this. Okay. These things you can do later, not earlier. So the Gemara says Tisha B'av akdume. Why? So why don't you do Tisha B'av earlier? Akdume puranus lo makdimi. You don't want to start bringing in the bad things, the thing that evokes all of the bad events, and go early. Like let's do the fast earlier. No, these are things that we're supposed to want to be pushing off. Want to be sort of showing obviously our reluctance about them. The fact that they're bad days. Chagiga v'hakel. Why do you do Chagiga and Hakel later rather than earlier? Because the obligation doesn't come. Chagiga you only bring during the Chag. You don't bring it before the Chag. And Hakel, presumably, the obligation only begins after the Chag is out, and it doesn't begin earlier. So somehow there's a sense that once the obligation began, it could be done a little bit later. But before the obligation begins, you cannot do it. And Rashi says the same is true about the idea of Atzei Kohanim. I think it's a little tautologist. Why do we make an assumption that if it's not on the date, it can be later than the date, but not earlier than the date? But somehow that's the idea. All right. Tana Chagiga v'chol zman Chagiga ma'achru. So the Chagiga and the entire time of Chagiga you can postpone.
What
So what does that mean? I understand what it means to postpone Chagiga. If it comes on Shabbos, we postpone it till Sunday. What does it mean to postpone the time of the Chagiga? So Amar Rav Ushia Hachi Kamar, here's what it means. Chagiga b'Shabbos, there are two scenarios you'll push things off. Number one, if the Chagiga falls out on Shabbos, if the first day of Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos. And number two, the Olas Re'iyah, if the Ola that you also bring on Yom Tov, okay, over the Chag, that afilu b'Yom Tov disman Chagiga, even when, even in a normal scenario, that the Yom Tov is the first day of Yom Tov is not Shabbos, but nevertheless and the first day of Yom Tov is a day where you could bring the Chagiga. It's not a day where you could bring the Ola, and therefore the Ola will always be not on the first day of Yom Tov, Ma'achrin. So it's a very complicated way of saying you never bring the Olas Re'iyah on the first day of Yom Tov. Although the first day of Yom Tov is a Zman Chagiga, it's not a Zman Ola, and therefore you will always do it not on the first day.
Why is that?
Because Chagiga, you eat the meat, and therefore you can do something for Ochel Nefesh. Ola, you don't eat the meat.
Well, that's right. That's right.
So the Gemara says, and Mani, and who is this? Beit Shammai. It's Beit Shammai. Now we turn the Mishnah. Beit Shammai, Omi, Mivim, Shlomim, B'Yom Tov, Ein Somchin Aleim, Avolo, Olot. You could bring Shlomim on Yom Tov. You don't do Smicha. We won't get into that. But you don't bring Olot because you don't eat from them, even if it's an Olat Re'iyah. Beit Hillel, Omi, Mivim, Shlomim, Ve'olot, V'Somchin Aleim. You can even bring an Olat Re'iyah. It's a tzorach of the Yom Tov, and you can bring it.
Wow.
Rava Amar, we did all of that when debate. Rava Amar Chagiga Kos Man Chagiga Ma'achrin. Now Rava says a much easier read. You can postpone the Chagiga for the duration of the time of the Chagiga, for the duration of Yom Tov. But Fei Lo, you can't bring a Chagiga after Yom Tov. Nan, we taught in the Mishnah, meaning after the whole Chag. Right, so you can postpone it from the first day to one of the other days of the Chag. You can do it in a later Zman Chagiga, but you can't do it later than the Chag. Nan, we taught in the Mishnah, Mishalo Chag Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag. If you didn't bring the Chagiga on the first day, you do it the entire regel up through the last day, but you don't do it later than the last day. So you can only be ma'achrin if you're still during Zman Chagiga. Avar regel v'lo chag, and if the entire regel passed and you didn't bring your chagiga, eino chayav b'achriyu, so you're done. You're not obligated to bring it, but you also want yotzei. You're not able to do it. Rav Ashi Amar chagiga v'kol zman chagiga ma'achrin. The point of saying you can postpone it the entire reads it like Rava. You can bring the chagiga late, but only during the zman chagiga. But to tell you even a bigger chiddush, that you have the Zman Chagiga, you have a 7-day period to bring it, the Afilu be'atzeret, even by Atzeret, even though by Shavuos is a 1 day, you could be Ma'achrin the Chagiga if you didn't bring it, if the first day Yom Tov was Shabbos, or if Shavuos was Shabbos, you could be Ma'achrin it, and you have Kol Zman Chagiga, a whole 7 days to bring it, or 6 more days. Vafilu atzeres techad yom ma'achrin not modim Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel agrees chal atzeres liyos b'Shabbos sheyom tavuach achar Shabbos, that even though it's no longer Shavuos, the day of slaughtering is Sunday, that you can still bring it. There's an idea that the 6 days after Shavuot are still days which paralleling the other Chagim, which you can bring a Chagiga which still connect to the Chag. Okay, let's just again turn the page. Oh, we're going to have to catch up sometime. I'm a Rebbe Eliezer, I'm a Rebbe Chanina. Rebbe, maybe Shabbos, we'll do 2 of them. Rebbe Natan Etia B'Purim. V'rachat b'krona shel tzipari b'shivasar b'tamuz. So there you go, right yesterday. Rebbe number 1 did a planting on Purim. This is going to get to the issue of is Purim asur b'asiyas melacha. Number 2 is he bathed in the wagon area, like in the wagons of Tzipori. It just means in public, hopefully whatever. He went into the bathhouse in public in Tzipori on Shivasar B'Tammuz to show that although it is a tainus, you don't have any of the other inuyim, right? Yesterday you could have taken a shower, you could have done all the other things that you can't do on Tisha B'Av and on Yom Kippur. So he did that to sort of publicly make that statement. Ubikesh lakor Tisha B'Av lo hodulo. And he actually wanted to just get rid of Tisha B'Av, but they didn't agree to him. So that's crazy. Why would he want to get rid of Tisha B'Av, and how is he able to get rid of Tisha B'Av? So Tosfos reads it to mean he doesn't literally want to get rid of Tisha B'Av. Maybe he wanted to make Tisha B'Av on the 10th of Av, because if you remember, we learned at the end of Tanis that there's reasons to argue that it should have been the 10th of Av. But anyway, it's a pretty drastic statement. So we'll just read one line about this in the Gemara. Amar Lefanav, or not the Gemara, the end of this, right? Amar Lefanav Rabbi Ava Rabbi Zavta. Rabbi Lokach Hayamasa. Rabbi, that wasn't what happened. It wasn't that he tried to completely uproot Tisha B'Av. It was a specific case where Tisha B'Av fell out on Shabbos, and we were going to, like the Mishnah says, postpone it to the 10th, the Amar Rebbe, and to Sunday. And Rebbe said, you know what? Since we're anyway, not having Tisha B'Av on the right day, we might as well not do it. So he actually, in 1 year, when it fell out on Shabbos, that was the year he wanted to not have it. He didn't want to permanently get rid of it, but if you're not doing it on the right day, just forget about it. And the rabbis did not agree to him. No kidding. So Kari Alei, who was it that originally said this statement? Rabbi Eliezer, in the name of Rabbi Chanina, said back to Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda, who remembered the story differently. Tovi mashnayim min ha'echad. So 2 is better than 1. Without you around, I would have completely misremembered what this event was with Rebbe. You helped me remember correctly that it was a particular case of Tisha B'Av that fell out on Shabbos. We'll pick up with this tomorrow in the discussion of really the first line, which is the fact that he made a planting on Purim. Is Purim Asr B'Asiyat Malacha or not? So for that, we will see tomorrow.
What did you do to Rebbe?